Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. This is the show where we really get into fascinating topics, break them down so you don't have to sift through all the reports and, dense articles yourself.
That's the goal.
Today, we're heading into some pretty evocative territory. The silent landscapes of abandoned mines and the, spectral remains of ghost towns.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, think of these places as sort of like open books, right? They tell stories of ambition, resourcefulness, but also sometimes the really harsh realities of decline.
Definitely. Stories etched into the land itself.
We've gathered some really compelling material. We've got an academic paper looking deep into abandoned mines from the Australian Centre for Geomechanics.
A solid source.
And also this captivating online photography gallery showcasing ghost towns. It really brings the visual element to life.
Yeah, the visuals are powerful with these topics.
So our mission for this deep dive, it's really to understand the forces, the challenges, the stories behind these, forgotten corners of the world, and hopefully draw out some lessons, maybe for ourselves, about how we interact with our environment.
Lessons about legacy, I suppose.
Exactly. Okay, ready to jump in?
Let's do it. It's interesting, right off the bat, when we talk about an abandoned mine, it's not quite as clear-cut as you might think.
Oh, how so?
Well, you hear all these different terms thrown around: derelict, orphan, legacy.
Right, I've seen those.
And, according to the UN Environment Program, the UNEP, the real core issue often comes down to incomplete cleanup.
Okay.
And this big question mark hanging over who's actually responsible for fixing the leftover problems.
So it's like a global game of responsibility, hot potato almost.
You could say that. And what's really striking, looking at the Australian sources, is how much the definitions vary even within one country.
Really? Give me an example.
Okay, so Queensland, for instance. They basically say a mine's abandoned once the lease is gone, and there's, no legal way left to make the original company clean it up.
Right, the door is closed.
Yeah. But then New South Wales talks about derelict mines. The Northern Territory uses legacy sites.
Legacy sites, okay.
Victoria just kind of lumps them under contaminated land. It makes comparing things really difficult.
Yeah, it sounds like trying to compare apples and, wrenches. Very different things.
Exactly. And then Western Australia, they have a whole different process involving a ministerial declaration, advice from a panel. It often focuses on sites where you just can't pin down a responsible party anymore.
Huh. Complicated.
And then there's this broader idea of mining legacies, which researchers like Pepper talk about, that basically covers all sites needing some kind of management, not just the officially abandoned ones.
So just defining the problem is a challenge in itself.
Absolutely. Even step one is tricky.
And this isn't just an Australian issue, right? I mean, Canada, the U.S., they must grapple with this too.
Oh, definitely. They have their own angles. Canada's National Orphaned and Abandoned Mines Initiative, NOMI, is interesting.
Okay.
They actually include sites where the current owner might just be unable or maybe even unwilling to do the cleanup, even if they still hold the lease.
Okay, that's a different twist. And the U.S.?
The U.S. Abandoned Mine Lands Program, the AML program, it tends to focus more specifically on land that's been scarred by past mining activities that have, completely stopped.
Got it. Scarred lands.
And just to add one more layer, this researcher, Whitbread Abrutat, makes a useful distinction.
What's that?
Between abandoned sites where you know who the owner is, but they won't or can't act, and orphaned sites where the owner is just gone, untraceable.
Wow. Abandoned versus orphaned. That really highlights we're not just talking about, holes in the ground.
Not at all.
It's this complex web, right? Legal stuff, money, and of course the environmental fallout.
A huge web.
So let's step back a bit. How did we end up with so many of these abandoned mines and the sort of associated ghost towns? What's the typical story there?
Well, if you look back historically, the discovery of valuable stuff, gold, silver, copper, lead, was this massive magnet.
The classic gold rush idea.
Exactly. It fueled exploration, settlement, these towns popping up really fast in places like the Australian mineral fields or the American West. Often, these mining operations became the absolute economic bedrock of these remote communities.
You can almost picture it, right? Boom towns exploding overnight, just buzzing with activity and hope.
Totally. But the flip side, the inevitable part, was when those easy-to-reach rich resources ran out.
The boom goes bust.
Precisely. Miners, who often didn't have super deep roots there anyway, would just, pack up their gear and move on to the next prospect.
Following the money, or the potential money.
And here's the really crucial point from our sources, historically speaking. Often, these companies had zero legal obligation to fix the land they'd mined.
None at all.
Nope. Or even to set aside money for cleanup down the road. It was often just about getting the minerals out, making the profit, and, well, the mess was someone else's problem later. Or nobody's.
Profit now, problems later. A pattern of extraction without much thought for the long term.
That sums it up pretty well.
Which brings us squarely to the fallout, the consequences of all this abandonment. It's obviously more than just an ugly landscape, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And it really makes you question the true full cost of resource extraction, doesn't it? Abandoned mines create this whole cascade of problems, environmental, social, economic.
Like what specifically?
Well, think immediate safety risks, open mine shafts. That figure 2 image we saw is pretty stark. There's serious hazards for people, kids exploring, even animals.
Yeah, terrifying.
Then you've got potential loss of cultural heritage at some sites.
Yeah.
And the economic depression in the communities that get left behind when the main industry vanishes.
Right, the economic engine just shuts off.
And a major point from the academic paper is that the money available to actually fix these problems, it's severely limited pretty much everywhere.
So a massive problem, very little funding to address it.
That's often the reality.
And the way mining itself has changed over time, that's also made the legacy issue worse, hasn't it?
Yes, that's a really key insight. The evolution of mining techniques has definitely scaled up the challenge.
How so?
As the easy, high-grade ores got depleted, companies had to mine and process vastly larger amounts of rock to get the same amount of metal.
Makes sense. More rock, more waste.
Exactly. And the shift from often smaller underground mines to these huge open-cut or open-pit operations, that dramatically increased the amount of waste rock generated and the sheer area of land disturbed.
Much bigger footprint.
Much bigger. Plus, going deeper meant pumping out huge volumes of groundwater dewatering, which has its own impacts. And of course, practices that were considered totally fine back then are nowhere near today's environmental standards.
Which really highlights why modern mining laws, the ones focusing on rehabilitation, are so important.
Absolutely critical. Laws that mandate proper mine closure plans and, crucially, financial assurance.
Financial assurance? What's that exactly? Like a safety deposit?
Yeah, basically. It's money set aside upfront to guarantee the funds are there for cleanup later, even if the company goes bust. It's vital to stop creating new legacy sites.
Because these old abandoned mines, they're seen as failures, right? Failures of regulation.
Increasingly, yes. They're viewed as regulatory failures, and their existence really erodes public trust. Trust in government oversight, trust in the mining industry itself.
And that has knock-on effects.
Definitely. It can make it much harder for companies to get what they call a social license to operate for new projects. People look at the past messes and say, why should we trust you now?
So the industry's future reputation, its access to future resources, it's all tied up with how it handles its past.
Deeply intertwined. Managing the legacy is key to the industry's long-term health and public acceptance.
Okay, it sounds like a truly enormous problem, but do we have any real sense of the scale? Like, how many of these sites are out there globally?
That is a critical question, and honestly, it's hard to answer definitively. While you might think, let's just go fix them all, the source material points out it's often not practical.
Not practical. Or even desirable.
Sometimes not even desirable, yeah.
Yeah.
Some sites have real historical or cultural value, maybe even ecological value in some ways now. But the biggest hurdle to knowing the true scale,
What's that?
just a lack of consistent data. How sites are defined, how they're tracked, it varies wildly between regions, between countries. So getting a reliable global or even a clear national picture is really tough.
So any numbers we do have are likely just, what, the tip of the iceberg?
Very likely, yes. Take the United States. The EPA categorizes abandoned mines, coal, hard rock, uranium, but they openly admit they don't have a comprehensive system to actually monitor the hundreds of thousands of sites believed to exist.
Hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
Just in the U.S.
Yeah. And Australia. The estimate is over 50,000 mining legacy sites. But again, given those definition issues and data gaps we talked about, the real number is probably much, much higher.
And not all states even track them publicly.
That's right. Some Australian jurisdictions just don't have publicly accessible, up-to-date inventories. Makes it hard for anyone to get a clear handle on the situation locally.
But some places have a better idea, you mentioned.
Yes, some do. Queensland, for example, they've identified over 15,000 sites. Several hundred of those are classed as medium to large scale, including major historical sites like the Met Morgan gold mine.
Okay, 15,000 in just one state.
And then look at Western Australia. Their WabMines database lists something like 190,000 features related to abandoned mine sites.
Features, not necessarily whole sites.
Exactly. It could be individual shafts, pits, waste dumps. So it's a huge number, but it's not a count of distinct mines necessarily. Still, it gives you a sense of the sheer density in some areas.
Those are staggering numbers, however you count them. So let's talk specifics. What are the most serious risks? The immediate dangers, the long-term environmental threats from these sites.
The risks are definitely substantial. The Queensland government info, for instance, points squarely at immediate public safety hazards.
Like those open shafts again?
Exactly. Unrestricted access to open shaft, that figure 2 image really is a powerful warning. Also, the risk of the ground just collapsing, subsidence.
Right, unstable ground.
And then there's the ongoing pollution from what's left behind, residual stockpiles of waste rock, tailings, and especially the problem of acid mine drainage.
Acid mine drainage, AMD. We hear that term a lot with mining issues. Can you break that down? What is it and why is it such a big deal?
Okay, so AMD is arguably one of the biggest, most persistent environmental headaches from mining globally. What's particularly insidious about it is how it forms.
How does it happen?
Many ore deposits contain sulfide minerals, think fool's gold, pyrite, things like that. When mining exposes these minerals to air and water,
Which it inevitably does.
right, a chemical reaction starts. They oxidize, basically like rusting, but the result is sulfuric acid.
Sulfuric acid.
Okay, that sounds bad.
It is. This acidic water then flows through the mine workings, the waste rock piles, the tailings dams, and it starts dissolving heavy metals and other contaminants present in the rock.
So it leaches out toxic stuff.
Precisely. It becomes this toxic soup laden with metals like copper, lead, cadmium, arsenic, depending on the geology.
And where does that toxic soup go?
Well, that's the problem. If it escapes the mine site and gets into streams, rivers, lakes, groundwater, the impact on aquatic ecosystems can be absolutely devastating.
Devastating how?
It can completely wipe out fish, insects, plants, basically the entire aquatic food web. The acidity itself is harmful, and the dissolved metals are often highly toxic, even at low concentrations. Imagine leaving like a rusty wrench out in the rain for years. Rust is oxidation. Certain rocks and mines do something similar chemically, but create this harmful acid that pulls toxic metals into the water.
So it's like a chemical time bomb that keeps polluting potentially for decades or even centuries.
Exactly. It can be a very long-term, self-perpetuating cycle of pollution unless it's actively managed, which is often expensive and difficult.
You mentioned some specific Australian examples where AMD is a known ongoing issue.
Yes, there are several well-known sites. Rum Jungle up in the Northern Territory, that's a classic example. Mount Lyell in Tasmania has major historical AMD issues impacting the Queen River.
And Mint Morgan, you mentioned that earlier.
Mint Morgan in Queensland is a really significant case study. It shows the sheer scale and longevity of the problem. Mining happened there for nearly 100 years.
A long time. What do they mean?
Primarily gold, silver, and copper. Huge production. But it also generated a colossal amount of waste, something like 134 million tons of waste rock and tailings.
134 million tons. That's
It's-
hard to even picture.
It's immense, and because they used an acidic leaching process to get the copper out, the leftover tailings are incredibly acidic. We're talking an average pH of just 2.
pH 2. That's like stomach acid level, isn't it?
Yeah.
Extremely acidic.
Extremely. And crucially, the mine wasn't properly rehabilitated before it closed. The site was basically just left.
So what happened then?
Well, once the open-cut mining stopped and they turned off the dewatering pumps, water started filling the giant pit. But because of all the exposed reactive rock...
It became an AMD-rich brew.
Exactly. A highly acidic pit lake formed, full of dissolved metals at dangerous concentrations.
And that stayed contained.
Until 2013, there was major regional flooding, and for the first time, the pit lake actually overflowed its banks.
Why?
No. Highly acidic, metal-laden water poured into the nearby Dee River. The pollution plumes stretched downstream for an alarming 50 kilometers.
50 kilometers. The environmental damage must have been immense.
Catastrophic for that stretch of river. And that image, figure 1, the photo of the pit lake itself, that vast, weirdly colored body of water, it really drives home the scale of this ongoing environmental hazard. It's just sitting there.
It's a truly sobering reminder, isn't it? The long-term environmental price we can end up paying if resource extraction isn't managed with foresight and responsibility.
Absolutely. A very long shadow.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly now to the other side of our deep dive. Ghost towns. These feel like maybe the human equivalent of the abandoned mines, right? the remnants of the communities.
That's a great way to put it. If the mines are the environmental and economic scars on the land, the ghost towns are the human counterpart. Settlements that once pulsed with life, often completely reliant on those mines.
But are now largely deserted, decaying.
Exactly. Falling silent.
And there's something undeniably powerful, almost haunting, about the images you see of ghost towns. That T&K Images gallery you mentioned.
Yes, it captures it beautifully.
You see nature just slowly, relentlessly starting to reclaim these places. Buildings crumbling, plants growing through floorboards.
That juxtaposition is really striking, isn't it? The human-made structures giving way to the natural world. It creates this really evocative, thought-provoking visual story.
And as the gallery notes, it's a form of photography. They can be real art. It adds character, history, a certain intrigue to these empty spaces.
Definitely. It tells a story without words.
Looking through that gallery, you see places like Robson's Arizona Mining World, Vulture City Ghost Town, Body State Historic Park in California.
Classic example.
Yeah, you see the old main streets, the mine head frames still standing, maybe an old mercantile, a schoolhouse. You can almost hear the echoes of the people who were there.
It sparks the imagination, for sure. Makes you wonder about the lives lived there.
So why do these places empty out? We've talked about resource depletion with the mines, but what other factors lead to towns becoming ghost towns? You mentioned that Reddit discussion.
Right. Drawing on discussions like that and other sources, it's clear there's a whole spectrum of reasons beyond just the mine running dry.
Okay, like what?
Natural disasters are a big one. Severe droughts making agriculture impossible, major earthquakes, volcanic eruptions burying a town.
Things you can't control.
Exactly. Then there's disease. Pandemics sweeping through isolated communities. Warfare obviously can displace entire populations.
Makes sense.
Shifts in major trade routes can bypass a town, killing its economy. General economic collapse like the Great Depression emptied out many places.
So external forces often play a huge role.
Huge. And sometimes it's environmental contamination, think radiation, like Chernobyl, making an area uninhabitable, or even something as basic as the loss of a critical food supply.
Wow. A wide range of potential causes.
Definitely. And the abandonment itself can happen differently too, right?
What do you mean?
Well, sometimes it's a slow, gradual decline over years or decades as opportunities dry up and people drift away. Other times it can be sudden, almost overnight, due to a specific event like a disaster or an evacuation order.
A slow fade versus a sudden cutoff.
Precisely. And what's also interesting looking at resources like How Stuff Works or List First is that the term ghost town isn't always absolute. It's not always completely empty forever.
Oh, people move back.
Yeah.
Or they become tourist sites.
Both, sometimes. Some ghost towns are being rediscovered, preserved, and turned into tourist attractions. They get a second life, albeit a different one.
Like Body in California, maybe.
Body's a great example, managed as a state park in arrested decay. And Listverse actually gives examples of American quote-unquote ghost towns that still have a handful of residents.
Really? Like who?
Places like Good Springs, Nevada, Thurman, West Virginia, Jerome, Arizona. I might only have a few dozen people, or even just one, like Amoe, Nebraska.
One resident, wow.
Yeah. But it shows the definition can be fuzzy. The line between a living town, a dying town, and a true ghost town can be pretty blurred. Places like Centralia, Pennsylvania, still technically have residents despite the ongoing underground coal fire.
Okay, so it offers maybe a tiny glimmer of hope that these places aren't always destined for just complete oblivion.
Perhaps, or at least their story evolves. They might find a new purpose, even if it's just bearing witness to the past.
So, bringing it all together then, looking towards the future, what are the key challenges that remain? And are there any potential opportunities associated with both these abandoned mines and these fading towns?
Well, to reiterate the big challenges, especially with the mines, the environmental risks, the safety hazards, the potential health impacts, those remain paramount. They have to be addressed.
Priority number one.
Absolutely. However, that academic source also makes a strong point about exploring potential post-mining values.
Post-mining values, what does that entail?
It includes things like conserving the mining heritage itself, the history, the structures, developing tourism around that heritage. This could create chances for local skills development, new jobs, alternative ways to use the land.
Interesting. Using the history as an asset.
Exactly. But the key, they stress, is involving the local community and other stakeholders right from the start, consulting them to figure out what values are important locally and how best to manage the site long term.
So collaboration is crucial.
Essential, it can't be just a top-down decision.
So instead of just seeing these sites as, liabilities, problems to be cleaned up, there's a potential shift to viewing them differently, maybe even as resources.
That's the potential shift, yes. Organizations like the ASEM, the Mining Institute, actually suggest integrating mining heritage tourism with the ongoing rehabilitation work.
How would that work?
Well, it could provide valuable educational opportunities for visitors while also bringing tangible socioeconomic benefits, jobs, income to the communities nearby that might have suffered when the mine closed.
Turning a negative into a potential positive.
That's the idea. But, and it's a big but,
Funding.
As the source rightly points out, securing the money needed to actually make this transition to turn a liability into an asset, that's a major hurdle.
Why is funding so difficult?
Well, partly because, as we discussed, we still don't have a great handle on the true total cost of rehabilitating all these abandoned mines in the first place. That lack of clear cost data makes it really hard for governments to allocate dedicated funds or develop effective long-term policies.
You can't budget effectively if you don't know the scale of the bill.
Pretty much, it hampers proper planning and investment.
So understanding the risks clearly must also be critical for deciding where to even start, right? You can't fix everything at once.
Absolutely. Risk assessment is a core principle here. You need robust processes to figure out which sites pose the greatest immediate threats to public safety or the environment and prioritize those for action. Resources like the DMP highlight this.
Makes sense. Triage the worst problems first.
Yes. Although our source also adds a note of caution that sometimes these risk assessment processes aren't as transparent as they maybe should be.
Room for improvement there too.
Seems so.
So it sounds like there's still a significant amount of work ahead.
Yeah.
Understanding the scope, managing the risks effectively, finding the funding, and maybe, just maybe, finding new value in these remnants of our industrial past.
Absolutely. It really requires ongoing, genuine collaboration between the industry, government agencies at all levels, scientists, and especially the local communities affected by these legacies. Working together is the only way to address these complex, long-lasting issues and hopefully move towards a more sustainable future for these landscapes.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive. It shed light on an aspect of our relationship with the earth that's often, hidden away or forgotten. We've explored the really complex legacy of mining,
the good and the bad,
the environmental and social scars that can literally last for generations, and these incredibly poignant stories of decline that are etched into both the abandoned mine sites and the ghost towns that relied on them.
They are powerful landscapes full of echoes.
They really are. And as you, our listener, maybe take a moment to think about these abandoned places, these sort of silent witnesses to our past ambitions and activities.
Yeah.
What insights can we really glean? What can we learn about the sustainability, or maybe the lack thereof, of some of our endeavors?
And about the enduring impact of how we relate to the earth and its resources. It also raises questions about responsibility, doesn't it? What responsibility do we, today, bear for these legacies left by past generations?
That's a heavy question.
It is. And how can we use that understanding to ensure we act more mindfully, more sustainably, as we move into the future? How do we avoid creating new problems for generations to come?
Really powerful questions, things that definitely linger long after this conversation ends. If this exploration into the echoes of the past has sparked your curiosity, maybe made you think, we really invite you to delve deeper with us here on the All Sorts podcast.
Always more to explore.
Absolutely. Please do us a favor, like, share, subscribe on YouTube. It really helps others find the show and ensures you won't miss any of our future deep dives into all sorts of compelling topics.
Check out the back catalog too.
Yes, definitely explore our past discussions. And you can join the conversation beyond the audio by following us on X, Instagram, and Threads. We post updates there and love hearing from you.
Keep the discussion going.
Thanks again for taking the deep dive with us today.